Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. If you've listened to the last 3 parts of this series, you'll already feel that something has been building. Not a conspiracy, not a sudden collapse, but a slow, steady progression. Money moving further and further away from physical reality, further away from natural limits, and deeper into systems of trust that most people never chose but live inside every day. Part 4 is where that progression completes its loop. In Part 1, we looked at why money exists at all, how it emerges naturally from human cooperation, how barter fails at scale, and why gold became important as a store of value. In Part 2, we explored what happened when money became abstract, when records replaced metal, when trust concentrated power, and how early banking systems like the Knights Templar proved that money could move without physically moving at all. In Part 3, we saw how states realized that controlling money was as important as controlling territory, how public debt became permanent, how inflation emerged as a social force, and how money slowly became institutional rather than natural. Let me walk this step by step, because this part only makes sense if we keep the chain intact. Step 1 is gold-backed money, where supply is naturally limited. Step 2 is governments needing more flexibility during wars and crises, which leads to temporary suspensions. Step 3 is Bretton Woods, where the dollar becomes the bridge between gold and every other currency. Step 4 is the problem. The world needs more dollars than the gold backing can support. Step 5 is 1971, when that gold link is cut. And Step 6 is what follows logically. Once money is fully fiat, the system depends on institutions managing supply responsibly. And that creates the environment where Bitcoin can exist as a rules-based alternative. Now we reach the final stage. The moment money fully detaches from physical reality. This is not where the system suddenly becomes evil. It's where it becomes fragile. The gold standard, for all its flaws, imposed discipline. Governments could not spend freely without consequence. Wars had to be financed honestly or not at all. Inflation was constrained by scarcity. That discipline was painful during downturns, but it preserved long-term stability. And that's precisely why it eventually became politically intolerable. The 20th century changes everything. 2 world wars place unprecedented strain on national finances. Governments suspend gold convertibility temporarily to fund military spending. Temporarily becomes longer than expected. After the wars, attempts are made to restore order. But the world has changed. Industrial economies are larger, more complex, more interconnected, and far more politically sensitive. Full monetary discipline is no longer compatible with modern governance. In 1944, representatives from 44 countries meet in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new global monetary system. The result is a compromise. The US dollar is tied to gold. Other currencies are tied to the dollar. Gold still exists at the center, but ordinary people no longer interact with it. Only governments and central banks do. For a while this works. Post-war growth is strong. Trade expands. Confidence holds. But the system contains a flaw. The United States must supply dollars to the world to facilitate trade, but those dollars are still supposedly redeemable for gold. Over time, more dollars exist than there is gold to back them. This tension grows quietly for decades. By the late 1960s, foreign governments begin demanding gold in exchange for dollars. US gold reserves decline. The contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. And in 1971, President Richard Nixon makes an announcement that permanently changes money. The United States suspends the dollar's convertibility into gold. There is no vote. No public debate, no global consensus, just a decision. From that moment on, every major currency in the world becomes fiat money. Money backed not by physical reality, but by trust in governments and central banks. This is the first time in human history that money exists entirely by decree. Nothing explodes. Shops do not close. Life goes on. Which is precisely why the magnitude of this change is rarely understood. Fiat money works because people accept it, and people accept it because everyone else does. Taxes must be paid in it. Debts are denominated in it. Wages are earned in it. The system reinforces itself. but the constraint is gone. Once money is no longer tied to anything scarce, the only limit on its creation is policy. And policy responds to incentives. Political incentives, economic incentives, crisis incentives. Inflation becomes manageable rather than avoidable. Debt becomes normal rather than dangerous. Central banks gain immense power, not because they are malicious, but because they are tasked with stabilizing systems that no longer stabilize themselves. This is where modern monetary life truly begins. Central banks now manage interest rates to influence borrowing and spending. They inject liquidity during crises. They act as lenders of last resort. These tools prevent collapses, but they also introduce distortions. Asset prices inflate faster than wages. Debt accumulates. Inequality widens, but slowly, quietly. This is the part most people struggle to articulate. The system doesn't feel broken, it feels stressful. People work harder, save more, and still feel like they are standing still. Prices creep up. Housing becomes harder to afford. Debt feels permanent. And yet there is no single villain. No obvious moment where things went wrong. That's because fiat systems don't collapse dramatically by default. They degrade gradually. Inflation acts as a release valve. It allows governments to spend without explicit taxation. It allows debt to be reduced in real terms without being repaid. It smooths crises at the cost of long-term purchasing power. This is why inflation is tolerated, even targeted. And this is where trust becomes absolute. Under fiat money, you are no longer trusting the scarcity of gold. You are trusting institutions to behave responsibly forever. You are trusting that incentives will never override restraint. You are trusting that short-term political pressure will never overwhelm long-term stability. History does not support this assumption. This doesn't mean fiat money is a scam. It means it is human. And human systems drift. So where does Bitcoin fit into this? Bitcoin does not appear because people suddenly lose faith in governments overnight. It appears because the final constraint is removed. Once money becomes fully abstract, fully policy-driven, fully trust-based, the idea of rebuilding money around rules instead of discretion becomes possible. Bitcoin is not an upgrade to fiat. It is a response to it. For the first time, it becomes possible to create digital scarcity without relying on institutions. To create money that is not issued, but discovered. Not managed, but enforced by code. Not trusted because of authority, but trusted because it cannot be changed. This is the key shift. Every previous form of money required trust in people. Bitcoin replaces that with verifiable rules. You do not need to trust who runs it. You can see how it works. You can verify its supply. You can opt out of custodians. You can hold it without permission. That does not make Bitcoin perfect. It makes it different. Bitcoin does not promise price stability. It does not promise equality. It does not promise fairness. It promises predictability, scarcity, resistance to manipulation. And that promise only makes sense after thousands of years of monetary experimentation. Bitcoin is not trying to replace banks tomorrow. It is not trying to overthrow governments. It is not a rebellion. It is an alternative. A parallel system. An option that did not exist before fiat made it necessary. This is why Bitcoin emerges after 1971, not before. It requires digital networks. It requires cryptography. But more importantly, it requires a world where money has lost its anchor. Bitcoin reintroduces an anchor, not in metal, but in mathematics. And whether Bitcoin succeeds or fails in the long run is almost beside the point. The idea cannot be uninvented. The concept of non-sovereign money now exists. That changes the conversation forever. For the first time, individuals can choose between trust-based money and rule-based money, between systems managed by discretion and systems governed by code, between inflationary supply and fixed supply. This does not mean everyone will choose the same thing. It means choice returns. And that is the real ending of this series. Money began as a tool to reduce friction and enable cooperation. It evolved into a mechanism of power. It became abstract, institutional, national, and finally global. Bitcoin is not the end of money. It is the first credible attempt to reset its foundations without violence or collapse. Whether it becomes dominant or remains a niche asset, It has already done its job. It has forced a re-examination of what money is, who controls it, and why. If you've listened through all 4 parts of this series, you now understand money better than most people ever will. Not because you memorized facts, but because you can see the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Money is not neutral, it is not static, and it is never finished. Thank you for listening through this holiday series. Thank you for the time, the attention, and the trust. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, follow for more deep dives like this, and as always, we will see you at the top.